Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us here in the Mastermind. We're going to be talking about a very interesting topic near and dear to my heart, wood ash versus lime. And as everyone likely knows, I'm very excited about things that we're recycling and repurposing and putting back to work in the earth. So it's going to be a great session. And we did get our CEU credits for everybody, which we'll present at the end of the session. And this will be recorded and put into the classroom, and we'll share the transcripts as always. And we appreciate your questions as we go. So feel free to jump in anytime. So how are you doing there today, Dr. Ieuan Evans? Some call you Dr. Copper.
Guten Morgen, I like to say, or I'd say in my first language, Bore da in Welsh. That's, most people don't realize it exists, but in Britain, there's several languages besides English.
Well,
Although
we are
we all
getting an
speak English as
education.
well.
Yeah. International discourse and greeting. I'm not even going to try and repeat whatever it was that you said, but I appreciate that you're such a cultured man. You just might be the most interesting man in the world.
Yes. I like to look at things in terms of, a word of advice, though, this morning before I start on the topic. I would like to apprise you of the fact that there are products always on the market that are fakes. I mean, I can say right now, no one's ever heard Donald Trump ever say a lie. Well, think about it, because there are products that you buy and see, and one advice today would be, please stay away from green lightning. I mean, some of the information in there is factually actually wrong. They can't detect it. Come on, you can't detect nitric acid? That's nonsense. But anyway, just stay away. Watch others do it. Don't you do
Wow.
it.
We started out with what not to do and a little bit of politics.
Right.
But
And
today's
well, there
session,
are things like I. This is my favorite, yeah, and you may have a copy of that. I think I sent it on.
yeah,
It's soil rejuvenation, and it's a product that's sold for $50 a 10-liter jug. It was plain and simply Edmonton City Water. And he sold hundreds of thousands of dollars, perhaps millions of dollars of it, because farmers never looked at the label. In
Ian,
Canada,
Ian,
the label
Ian,
must state
Ian.
things.
We're not talking about green lightning
No,
or
but
these
I'm just saying
products
that.
today. Okay,
No,
we're gonna talk about wood ash versus lime. Okay, I'm gonna keep you on
no,
track today.
but I just
That's
wanted to
not
say
on
the
the subject
label must
matter.
say.
That's not
It
on the
must say on
subject
the label.
matter, Dr.
Uh,
Ian. Let's talk
wood
about the
ash,
subject.
wood ash doesn't say on the label, but no, it must say on the label anyway. I'm just saying that. But wood ash, we produce lots of it on the prairies every year. A lot of wood ash. In other words, there are hundreds of thousands of tons of it, millions of tons produced from the pulp industry primarily. And it's produced even in eastern Canada as well as BC. It's from all branches, all the leaves and branches. It's called hog fuel in some areas, and it's burnt down to a sort of a powder. Well, in other words, wood ash is basically when it's burnt down, it is made up of uh, uh, you know, uh, mostly calcium carbonate. In other words, if I were to look at this, the amount of in wood ash, just to give you a beginning, wood ash is 20 to 45% calcium carbonate, CaCO3. Maybe if it's still hot or dry, it's calcium oxide because it hasn't taken in the water. Now, the surprising thing about wood ash, it's most of it is landfilled. In other words, dumped. People are looking for landfills, easy to dump it. To negotiate with farmers takes a little trouble, or to give it away takes a little trouble. But that stuff, each ton of it, or 2 tons of it, say you put 2 ton an acre, 2 tons an acre of wood ash would give you 30 pounds of phosphate. 30 pounds of phosphate. Figure the cost of phosphate. And it also gives you 200 pounds of potassium. Now, besides, if you paid for acquired wood ash, you get up to 45% of the neutralizing power of lime and you're bringing in nutrients onto that land. The potash and the phosphate would pay for any cost you incurred on a tonnage. If you're doing a quarter section, there's enough wood ash every year to do about 200,000 to 300,000 acres on acidic soils in the prairies. Soils that are pH 4, 5, or 4, 5, or 5. There's lots of it around. In other words, so anytime you put on wood ash, it's probably good for 3, 4, maybe up to 10, 12 years or more. In other words, depending on the pH of your soil. Now, wood ash itself, like you say, is nutrient strong. It's even got micronutrients in it. I mean, that is something that people, forget about. Now, the micronutrients aren't going to be in any amount, but they're there. But the trouble with it is this: when you start putting wood ash on, the 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 uh, the desk boys who sit at the federal level, oh, it's got some arsenic in it. Oh, it's got some cadmium in it. Oh, we detected mercury in it. Now, come on, tell these people that every handful of soil has got trace levels of those toxins, or heavy metals. In other words, and sometimes, oh, you have to have a permit to use wood ash because they haven't tested it. Well, like, enlighten these people and tell them things like what happened last year, 2025. Do you know that there was 35 million acres of land that was burnt in Canada? Wood fires, forest fires. And you know that 35 million acres, the output of carbon dioxide from it exceeded all the industrial use in Canada of oil, gas, and coal? I mean, there was a massive influx into the air. Did anyone worry about the wood ash that came out from those burning fires? No. It goes back to the ground and refertilized where the trees grew. I mean, common sense is not a gift of most civil servants. I mean, he or
Can I
she
stop you
will.
there? Can I stop
Yeah,
you there? Can we pause?
yeah.
We had a question or comment here from Doug McFarland. Weeded a lot of ash, has a great place. Tested a field in 2012, started at 5.9 pH, added 8 ton of ash, went to 7.2 the next year, 2017 to 6.6 pH, and 2025 to 6.3 pH. And then he was also asking about what about the magnesium on high mag soils already?
Well, first of all, it probably moved into the profile, or moved to some degree in the profile. There's very little magnesium in wood ash. Wood ash is not like dolomitic limestone, which is having 10 or 20% magnesium. Wood ash is calcium, and there are trace levels of magnesium in there because the trees themselves would not take up that much magnesium. They only take up what they need, which would be very little, but they take up lots of calcium. So it would make little difference to, in fact, maybe it might even mitigate the magnesium calcium ratio.
Any follow up on that, Doug, or did you want to come on and chat? I can allow you to talk if you're interested, Doug. Doug, did you want to share anything? Are you in a position to follow up on that? Do you have any more questions on that?
Any yield problems or?
He's still muted. We'll see if.
Yeah.
Hey, Doug.
Yeah, no, we've done a ton of ash over the years here, and it's in the right place. It's one of the best things you can do. We do have real high magnesium soils, and there is enough. The biggest challenge we have with it is it doesn't solve our high mag, our cation exchange problems.
I don't think so.
It doesn't
Yeah.
solve the high mag soils. It doesn't move them wrong, but it doesn't help it. And when we're dealing with 35, 40% magnesium, it's challenging.
Yeah, it wouldn't make any difference to high magnesium soils. It wouldn't add to it, but it certainly wouldn't solve it.
That's right.
So you'd have to live with that high magnesium. But did you notice any yield bumps then? In other words, if you had a 5.9 and you're growing, say, wheat, did it go from, say, 60 to maybe 70 or 75?
Oh, this is alfalfa fields, and we use it in mainly
Oh, okay.
alfalfa and non-manured fields. And it works excellent. It works excellent. He's left it in way too long. It's coming out. It came out last fall, and we're gonna do something else with it for a couple of years, and then get it back in
What,
alfalfa shape. Probably with another big application of ash.
at 8 tons an acre of wood ash, you're really piling on the potassium and phosphate, exactly what the alfalfa takes off.
Well, the potassium went from 278 ppm to 527. And right now, without any more added potassium or manure, it's sitting at 364.
Uh-huh.
So
Because you're getting a freebie of potassium and phosphate.
yeah, our phosphorus was at 58 when we started, and we're still at 55 ppm. So
Yeah,
it's worth more for the other nutrients than just the lime, or it's worth more than the lime if you were just putting it on for lime.
exactly. This is why it's a mystery why it's, in other words, farmers haven't, or at least the federal or other governments, provincial governments, haven't made an effort to get that back on the land. You're putting back on the land what you've taken off. So, to me, it's always been a mystery why they look at ifs and buts and they make statements like, copper and zinc and heavy metals. No, they're not. Those are bioessential metals. Heavy metals are gold, silver, mercury. You know what I mean? They get the facts wrong, and they worry about trace minerals in the ash, which is normal.
We've never
Makes
had a
sense?
heavy metal problem on even fields we've put ash on for 4 times.
No, there's no heavy metal problem. That's a myth in a way. What is a heavy metal? Certainly, copper and zinc is not. And the amounts of their trees and stuff, they take up minute amounts. Any soil, any garden, any field, any place will have trace levels of all the heavy metals. Guaranteed. I guarantee that if you dug a square foot of soil from any place on the prairies and had it checked out, it would have parts per million or parts per billion of everything virtually on Earth. But people see it in print and they get a little paranoid, I suppose.
We have higher background cadmium than we do in our ash.
Well, there's some in there, but I mean that's normal, you know what I mean?
No, but our background in the soil is higher than the ash, so it doesn't make it worse.
Okay, yeah. See, some soils do have unfortunate high levels of cadmium. But when you add things like zinc or from the ash there, that actually does suppress the cadmium. So I know what I did. My first introduction into pH in soils was I grew up in a country where pH of soils was 4.5 to 5, and we had to put lime on. And I sort of thought, well, we grew wheat and stuff and barley. And then look, I had a question one time in Kalmar, and this didn't involve wood ash, but it involves a farmer who had two fields, 2/4 sections side by side. And he asked me and said, I'm getting 60 bushels of wheat from one of my quarters. He says, I'm only getting 50 to 52 bushels from the other quarter. Well, I went through the field and looked for diseases and all that and yapped and walked around. And then I found out he was in his 60s. And I said, what's the history of the fields then? Well, he said, when my first 20, 30 years, I was a fertilizer dealer. Yeah. I said, okay. So did you use any fertilizer? Well, he said, over the field with a lower yield, I said, I often would end up with tailings, screenings of what do you call it? Not ammonium phosphate or ammonium sulfate, he said. And I'd apply it to that one field, he said, because it was closer to the house and I would dump it on the field. Well, what he had done is over the years, last thing he said, about 10 or 15 years, we put screenings on, he'd brought the pH down almost 1 factor, because when I went through the field then and took a pH of the soil in the good field was 6.5 more or less on average. The soil in the field with a lower yield was 5.6. He had actually brought the pH down almost 1 item over the years with ammonium sulfate. And that's exactly what we're doing right now in a way. In other words, the more fertilizer you add to a field, you are not quickly, but slowly and gradually bringing the pH down. And if the bringing the pH down gives you an answer, even on pasture land, I once did a thing on again on a lawn, and I was asked as to why the top deteriorated and the grasses weren't doing very well. So I did a sort of a careful thing. This lawn had been in place for 30 years, and he'd used regular fertilizers every year, an ammonium fertilizer. And the top 3 inches went about pH 3.5 to 4. I mean, surprisingly low in the top thatch. The middle 3 to 6 or 7 inches went to pH 4.5 to 5. And I thought that's unusual because, it was in an area of normally pH is about 6 to 7. Well, then when I went down a foot, more than a foot, the pH was 7.8. What had
Is this
happened?
related to wood ash, Ieuan?
Yes, it shows that when you add fertilizer, you slowly bring the pH of the soil down. In other words, when you keep adding fertilizers, and as we go for higher and more yields, we are now bringing the pH of the soil down. And this comes into wood ash directly where minimum till. When you start looking at minimum till, what are you doing? Just like the lawn. And I mean, I use those as facts because I prove them factually. You keep adding fertilizer in the top 3 inches, side banding or whatever you want to, or broadcasting, whatever. You bring in the fertilizer in the field. And if your field pH is, say, 6.5 or 6 to begin with, you may slowly bring that down. So there may be land that's not acidic,
Right.
but the top 3 or 4 inches may well be acidic. And if the top
Ieuan, how many acres of acidic soil are we dealing with here on the prairies?
On the prairies, we're looking at about 6 to 7 million acres. Most of the percentage is in Alberta, in the Peace region and west of Alberta. Saskatchewan has about 10%, and Manitoba has about 15%. Likewise, North Dakota has about 15%, just south of you. And these soils.
And at what pH threshold do you begin seeing this measurable yield suppression?
Well, anything that goes below 5.5 will start to slow down wheat, because to some degree it hankers on a bit of aluminum toxicity, eh? In other words, as it goes lower, barley and oats are more tolerant, and canola is more tolerant, but you will get a difference with wheat yields, because when we've done trials then, or I've looked at trials with pH, there may be significant jumps, and some soils, surprisingly, like would be like 3.5 to 4.5, and you think, oh, well, these acidic soils are only on the fringes of the prairies or whatever. No, if you go to Drumheller in that central area, I went through that area one time and I was amazed to find there was a huge strips, tens of thousands of acres in that area where the pH was 4.5 to 5. Incredible.
Okay, and
low.
can you tell me what happens physiologically in crops below 5.5 pH, Ieuan?
Well, physiologically, what happens is the availability of micronutrients increases, but as it goes below 5.5, you get more aluminum, and it's the whole interaction happens. And if you've got something, a crop like alfalfa, for example, and it goes below even 6.5, it fails to nodulate. It will not. There are legumes that will nodulate at low pH, but alfalfa has to fail at below 6.5. You put alfalfa in at 5.5, and I've dug the plants up. There's no nodules, or the nodules are not pink, they're not fixing. In other words, there may be nodules there. So in other words, if you were to grow legumes, you better get your pH 6.5 and up. In other words, I wouldn't even consider planting alfalfa unless my field was 6.5 and up. And even the other legumes like the clovers want at least 6. there are some acidic legumes there, but they're not big yielders, eh? So you really have to bring that pH up. And then with wheat is a bit of a pain because as it drops below 6, the yield will drop on it. 2 or 3 bushels an acre maybe, but that's significant in a way if when you get a tight edge, eh? And why should you lose that? Because the aluminum toxicity or the nitrogen stays in the soil. Maybe the follow-up crop of canola would pick it up, but you need soil that's sort of you need to bring the pH, optimize the pH. And we're not short of these products. It's just a question of getting them and evaluating the cost effectiveness. Now, if I was, say, near a wood pulp area and my pH of soil pH was 5.5, what's wrong in getting this thing spread on the land? In other words, there may be some local authority says, "Oh, we got to check this or check this out," but these are trees coming from adjacent cropland.
Yeah, we'll get into the economics there, Ieuan, but let's go into how wood ash functions. What is wood ash chemically in practical terms?
Well, chemically, it's about up to 40%, 45% lime equivalent. In other words, it actually, the wood ash itself has got calcium in it. In other words, 45% of that wood ash weight is calcium carbonate, in other words. And that calcium carbonate is the same as lime, just the same exactly as lime. It's in a fine powder, and it gets easily dispersed in the soil, like a quick lime. It's a bit dusty to handle, but it gets in that soil and it quickly, up to 8 ton an acre, it would raise the pH at least 1 or more. In other words, at 2 tons an acre, it supplies a lot of calcium, especially to low pH soils. If the pH was, say, 4 or 5, you might bring it up to 5 at 2 to 3 ton an acre, which would make a heck of a difference in crop yield.
And so how does that neutralizing function compare to limestone?
It would be very similar, except, a ton of lime would give you 95 to 98% neutralizing, and it's got the magnesium in it if you're short of magnesium. And whereas wood ash would give you 45% of that, 40 to 45%.
And can you speak to the calcium carbonate equivalency?
Yeah, in other words, if you took limestone at say 100, your wood ash is 45% of that 100.
Okay, and how does correcting the pH change the molybdenum?
Molybdenum
availability.
Molly, just say Molly.
Yeah. Don't just say Molly. That's a great idea.
What happens is most of your micronutrients are more available at low pH, and when dry conditions, wheat and barley go down to the subsoil up to 3 foot down there, they can pick up micronutrients, and we'll talk about the shallow thing again. But molybdenum is funny. Molybdenum, as the pH drops below 5, it becomes less available. At 4, 5, below 5 anyway, it's more or less unavailable. So the example of that is if you're doing minimum till, and you're one of those people who says, "I will never go back to tilling my land." Well, after 20 years, 25 years of minimum till, you take that soil surface down to 3 inches, and you may be surprised to find it's about 4, 5 to 5. Whereas you go down 6 to 8 inches, it's 6 to 7, right? So in other words, when the wheat or other crops get established, no problem. But if you seed canola in particular into that top soil, like I've seen happen in the piece, there's a delay. What happens is the canola goes down an inch or so in the soil, and the pH there is about 4 to 4.5, because the normal, because it's acidified over that time, the minimum till, because of the crop residues, they've all contributed to acidifying that top layer. Well, the canola is very slow in germinating and very slow moving off. You may lose a week or 10 days of growth because to get that molybdenum, the canola has to actually move further down the soil 2 or 3 inches to pick it up, and that's a slow process.
Can you explain how the nitrogen fixation efficiency shifts when pH improves?
Molybdenum is the key to making ammonia to nitrate and nitrate to ammonia and moving it. And if that's not there, the plant cannot take up the ammonia or nitrate and convert it in the plant. In other words, neither can legumes fix nitrogen then. Even acidic legumes have trouble fixing nitrogen if the pH drops. In other words, like clovers and stuff. In other words, you have to have a molybdenum. Molybdenum is the catalyst that swings the nitrogen level in plants and moves it back and forth. Now, there's a simple answer though to that. Molybdenum, you may add an ounce or two of molybdenum to the seed. In other words, several growers now up in the Peace region regularly put molybdenum with the canola seed. And those trace levels are often enough to get the crop up fast. So it's not in other words, where I grew up in Wales, it was called a poor man's lime. If a farmer couldn't afford a ton of lime or 2 tons of lime on his land, he got hold of molybdenum, and molybdenum was mixed through the seed, and the seed would germinate fairly quickly. Because if the pH was like 3.5 to 4, it may spend forever trying to germinate and grow away. But with the molybdenum, it's off and running with the nitrogen.
I'm impressed that you can say molybdenum on a Monday morning, because I apparently can't. And you can speak Welsh.
Well, molybdosis as well. Now, molybdosis is another thing when you got sort of acidic, not so acidic, but high lime soil, you got soils with soluble salts in them. In other words, saline soils, and there's another problem there, and that's with cattle.
Do we have any questions on that? It's a pretty big information dump. Lots of good stuff there, Ieuan. We want to get into the yield data next, but if anybody has any questions or wants to return to that, feel free. So let's talk about the yield data. Ieuan, walk us through the Alberta yield data, please.
Well, yeah, I had to check this up now if you don't give me a second, because I had taken the data, and put it here. What it was I reviewed quite a few experiments. I was involved in some of them early on, about 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And let's see where I put it here. Liming, acidity. You see, that lime will last 10 or 15 years in the soil, maybe even longer. And you can see that sometimes while you're driving through central northern Alberta, you'll see wood piles that were burnt in the field many years ago, and you'll see the much greener grass and vegetation around those burn piles, or in rows along the field where the burnt windrows, and you can see the beneficial effect to the pasture land. And farmers look at it and go, duh, you know what I mean?
Well, there's a lot of burning that goes on in Manitoba. I don't know, Trevor Thornton, if you have any comments on that. Did you find the yield data there?
I'm looking at it, now. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let's see the bushels. Okay, I remember some demonstration trials using wood ash or crushed limestone at 2.5 tons an acre on acidic soils in northeastern Alberta. This was going back 25 years now, or 30 years, when I was leaving government. The 4-year average yield for barley on the untreated land was 56 bushels an acre. The lime treatment was 78 bushels, and the wood ash was 84 bushels.
Yeah.
It was on that same land where they put 2.5 tons. Don't forget for the lime treatment for wheat was it? No, it was just that was right. For canola, there were 23 bushels on the control, 31 on the lime, and 37 bushels on the wood ash. Pea was 32 bushels on the control, and 48 on the lime, and 50 for the wood ash treatment. That was done out of Lethbridge in the Peace region 25 years ago. So, I mean, that is a actual thing, eh?
Mm-hmm.
So if you have any questions on it, in other words...
What was the canola response?
The canola jumped from 23 to, was it 23 to 35? There were 2 to 3 tons of an acre of wood ash. Let's see. 23 in the control, 31 with the lime, and 37 with the wood ash. And that was soil that was like 4.5 to 5.
Was there any economics done around that trial, or was it just
Oh
yield?
no, there was no question about it to jump in on this thing. No question about it. Those growers in that area were actively using wood ash after that. There
And
was
what was
wood
the
ash in the
application
area.
rate there?
Pardon?
And what was the
Two ton.
application
It was
rate?
2 ton an acre.
Two
It's
ton.
not huge.
And how many seasons did that response persist?
Well, I didn't find the data for that, but I did find data for other ones showing that when fields were done halfway and left, from by federal researchers, they would last. You could see the effect still lasting up to 15, even longer than 15 years, where there was a
Wow.
significant, in other words, a few bushel increase in the treated versus the untreated. Because
Mm-hmm.
it takes forever for that lime. It takes a long time for that lime. It was when lime was put on, say, or wood ash was put on at 4 to 5 tons an acre. It took that a length of time, the 15 years, to untreated and treated, where the soil pH started out about say 5.5. It may be even more now with Vin till, eh?
So when we talk about
We keep
economics per
putting more.
acre, at 2 tons per acre, what nutrient value is being applied, Ieuan? At 2 tons
Well,
per
at two
acre?
tons an acre, you're putting on 200. You're putting out 200 pounds of potash, which is essential for, that's what a crop of wheat. A crop of alfalfa will take up, and you're putting
Mm.
on almost 30 pounds of phosphate. Look at what's phosphate these days? $1 a pound.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I think
P
I
two
wonder
O
what
five,
potash is. Does anybody have any numbers? I'm thinking potash is probably
about 60 cents a
50,
pound, I think.
60 cents a pound. I mean, with everything that's going on in the
It
world, a lot of
changes,
these
it
nutrients
bounces
too are.
around, depends on.
Well, right now, everything we're hearing is that fertilizer is at a premium, especially since what was it? Iran is the third largest producer of urea. So, yeah,
No,
we
in
don't
other
need a
words, when
Canadian
when
world
when you
event, but
when you're looking at wood ash, I mean, for example, I have a large garden, 5 acres, right? And I have a burn pile, a burn area on the slope leading to a pond, and I burn wood products on that. There was trash wood, branches and stuff. I'm allowed to do
Mhm.
that. Well, the crops that I grow on that tomatoes are phenomenal. In other words, in sandy soil. In other words, I can see it myself. And when you think of the amount, then when you look at a ton of wood ash and you analyze it, what would you pay for 200 pounds of potash? What would you pay for 30 pounds of phosphate? And then you're putting it on your land, and not only are you raising the pH and helping an alfalfa crop, but you're feeding the alfalfa crop, because a crop of alfalfa would take, maybe, if you had a 4 ton, 5 ton crop of alfalfa, you're taking off about 200 pounds of potash.
How much
And
wood ash is being produced in Western Canada?
enough to uh, do about 200,000 acres.
Oh, okay,
In other words,
a year.
yeah, yeah, yeah. In other words,
Hmm.
we've got about 6 million acres, but I think I got the figures there.
Yeah,
Well, we've
where's
got
the
about three
majority
million
being produced?
right across the prairies, wherever this pulp industry is going on.
Yeah,
In other words, all the way through Edmonton, Alberta, across all the way through
Prince
Saskatchewan.
Albert. Yeah,
Yeah, and the thing is, the when you sort of look at the total beneficial effect of it. In other words, you think of the cost per of lime. Lime is going to be expensive. Now, we're not short of lime in Western Canada. The Rocky Mountains are all limestone. You're going to take a charge of that. But when you start looking at the right now, most of the wood ash goes into landfills, still going into landfills. About a quarter of it, a third of it now goes into cement making, and only about 15 or 20% of it goes on to land,
yeah.
cropland. Still a
When we
very
talk
small amount.
about
It may have changed.
transporting, when we talk about transporting and spreading costs, what matters most, Ian? Where is the cost being incurred here?
Well, the cost of transporting would be a significant cost, depending how far away you're from the area. But oftentimes, where you have the where you have the pulp industry, and timber industry, the soil is often the acidic areas of the provinces. In
Fair.
other words, so
Interesting.
you're
Yeah.
not too far away. So
Yeah.
it's not like saying you're taking it all the way to Taber, Alberta.
No.
Because what you're going to do is say, I'm in Saskatchewan, close to Prince Albert, or I'm in close to Grand Prairie.
Yeah.
Well, come on, guys, you're not taking it very far. Put it on the
No.
land.
Swan River, I think they were looking at that quite a bit, but in their research they found high boron levels. I believe that could be toxic.
Well, very high boron levels, but where in the wood,
Yeah, in
in
the in the
woody
wood
ash.
in the wood ash. Yeah.
It depends what they think is toxic or how much boron you're putting on. In other words, well, let's see what when you put an acre on, how much boron. You can put 3 or 4 pounds of boron in an acre in land that's boron deficient, and it's going to be okay. But any higher, or you can get boron toxicity. Right, but they often dwell on the problem, not the solution. In other words,
Well,
dwelling on the problem
where does
is
wood ash
neutral
make
aspect.
economic sense then, and
Well,
where does it not?
well, put it this way, I mean, you can always it makes common sense in an area if you've got trees being chopped down in the area and you've got cropland in the area, pH is low. Let's free fertilizer on it. Let's get the soil pH raised up. Let's bring your land up from say number 4 to number 3 or number 2, because you can do that by bringing these fertilizers on. It's in other words, wood ash is a gift. It's got the thing of raising the pH and the additional nutrients it's added to the soil. And by the way, not much, but it's got micronutrients in it.
Yeah,
You
we had
see,
a comment here from Doug that the boron testing is chemical but not available. Very little available. We do hot water now, and that is what the government wants for availability. It is a strong acid.
boric acid, yeah. No, it's not a strong acid. It's boric acid, boron. Boron's an essential mineral. You see, when you start looking at things in terms of need, there's I mean, farmers are really not behind the 8 ball. They're missing out on things. Soil scientists are not taught properly, neither are veterinarians. They do nothing with say, micronutrients. They talk about NP and K. Gosh, they used to even leave out sulfur a few years back. You look at a fertilizer bag, it'll be 22, 10, 0 or something, where's the sulfur? No mention on it. In other words, sulfur now has become important because our old fertilizers were ammonium sulfate and ammonium phosphate. They always had sulfur. But the new fertilizer are urea, and in other words, they don't contain sulfur unless it's
Yeah, Ian.
specifically
Yeah, Ian.
made for.
Yeah, Ian. On the
Yeah.
subject of wood ash, let's talk about the risk and regulatory concerns, okay? So, when we talk about these trace elements directly, what are the actual ppm levels that we're discussing here?
Well, it could vary from the area depending on the availability. In other words, they could be sort of in the wood ash itself. It could be say uh, 20 parts per million of zinc, let's say, or 10 parts per million of copper, which is really low. I mean, there's this. In other words, if you added it all up, it wouldn't come to us more than a pound or so an acre, if that, less than that. It would come to ounces an acre. As far as I can determine, the levels are pretty low because the plants need very low levels of micros. And I'm surprised to see that boron is high. Well, boron would only normally be high in saline areas, you know what I mean, like around sloughs and stuff, or trees growing in a saline area. They could be high in boron because the boron moves to those areas, eh?
Yeah. So how do those levels compare to some of the natural background soil concentrations? We were talking about cadmium, for example, earlier, that was higher in the soil than in the wood ash.
Well, some areas have naturally higher cadmium. They can have 5, 6 to 7 parts per million of cadmium, whereas in the wood ash it may only be 1 or 2 or 3. In other words, much lower. It's you see where a plant grows, it grows. If we get a crop of trees growing in the land, they need the NP and K and the sulfur. They need the micronutrients. But if there's a lot of zinc in it, they'll take up more zinc than they need if the zinc levels are high. They may need, say, 1/2 an ounce per acre of zinc. Well, because it's high in the level, they pick up 2 ounces. but it's not much different. They don't pick up excessive amounts. If there's copper in the soil was fairly high, they may pick up 2 ounces of copper per acre. Per acre, that would be, which is low. That's a per acre basis. Whereas or normally they only need 1 ounce per acre for normal growth. So they pick up a little excess. And see what's happening to our own cattle industry, if you look at it this way. When cows go into fields and chew up pasture, the zinc and copper are much lower than what they used to be, so they've got to supplement their diets now. In other words, we give cows copper, zinc, manganese, because over time we've lowered the levels, so the plants are only taking minimal amounts up enough to grow, and the levels are low, so we have to supplement them. Just like you take multivitamins. You go around and you say, why am I taking multivitamins? Because maybe our diet in some of them is missing. No, maybe not all of them, but it could be low or missing.
Okay.
See,
Okay.
so
That's cool.
you
That's
have to
cool.
add
So
those
Ieuan, back to wood ash. So when we put 2 tons per acre on, what dilution effect occurs?
It's phenomenal because the top 6 inches of soil is 2 million pounds. There's 2 million pounds. So when you put, say, if I went to a field and put 1 pound of boron on per acre, that's a half a part per million. So if I got a 1 pound of boron in my hand, which is sodium borate, 1 pound of boron equivalent, because the sodium borate is only 28% boron. But I put a 4 pounds of this borate on, which is actually 1 pound of boron, and then I analyze the soil because I got it evenly spread, it would come to a half a part per million. That's what the level of the soil is, because it's diluted out on 2 million pounds of soil.
Huh. Okay, I had a question here from Chris Sobchuk. Thank you for that. Very interesting. Chris is asking, am I understanding, Ieuan, that you apply it and it will last 5 to 7 years? Is that correct? I think you said 15.
Well, it depends on the area and the cultivation, but I've read reports where say if it is put on at 5 tons an acre, the residual effect is up to 15 years. Because you see, if it takes the soil, a pH say 4.5, and you put on 5 tons, it brings the pH up to 5.5 or 6, right? Well, that will last a much longer time than if you take the soil station from 6 to 7. You know what I mean? In other words, the effect, the lower the pH, the higher the effect, or the longer the lasting of it. Because that calcium doesn't go anywhere. That calcium doesn't. It's slowly, as you get acidifies the soil, that calcium sits there, and it's leached down as a soluble calcium thing slowly into the soil profile. But it doesn't move out from there. It doesn't leach out per se, but it gets acidified with the sulfur you put on. The sulfur comes on, and it forms calcium sulfate, but that's an insoluble one. But if it forms any other kind of product, like say with the nitrate, it'll move down the soil profile or gets taken out with the crop. Don't forget the crop. When you take a crop out, you take a lot of calcium out too. If you look at those tables on there, you're taking out. We don't think of it because it's a huge amount in the soil, but we take a lot of calcium out with the crop of food, because otherwise, how will the cows get bones? In other words, it's coming from the food they eat. Come on. So when you see a herd of cows on the field, all with big bones, and you take all the bones up, that's the calcium that came from that field. So it would last a long time, but it would slowly go down. The effect would be much lower. The effect in the first 2 or 3 years would be high. The effect, say, 10 years down the road, would be maybe a bushel or so an acre of wheat versus, a little less on the other side, eh?
That's a great answer. And I was just thinking as you're talking, how wonderful would it be if you had a spreadsheet ninja that could take the effects of improving your pH, making nutrients more available, what the actual value of the nutrients are, how long this lasts, what the cost of an application is. And sounds like a dream come true, but likely overlooked diamond in the rough, of which there's many in the universe. But Ieuan, hopefully that answers your question, Chris. If you have any more, thank you for your questions. If we have, if anybody else has any more questions, we're happy to answer them. When should wood ash not be used, Ieuan?
Well, I certainly wouldn't need to put, it's like taking coal to Newcastle, where you maybe don't understand that, but you wouldn't put wood ash in high pH soil. If I was living in Tabor or Lethbridge, I wouldn't think of wood ash
No.
because high pH is high enough as it is. I wouldn't go to central Manitoba where the soil pH is 8.1, 8.2. I mean, wood ash there is anathema because the pH is alkaline to begin with. So, but I'm looking for soils that are acidic. The acidic soils are generally near the tree line areas too, because the tree line areas are tree line areas because they've got acidic soil. We've never farmed them, eh? The
Okay.
soil
And
we always
where
grow.
did you give specific thresholds? Maybe you did earlier, sorry if I missed them, but what specific thresholds, what would be the criteria? Like if a producer, as far as the decision-making matrix goes here, if a producer is sitting on pH 5.2 soil, what would you recommend? Or
If he's
5.8 or 6.5?
if he's sitting on 5.2 soil, I'd say the first thing is, his minimum till, check your pH in the top layer. You're probably molybdenum deficient. Secondly, if you can get hold of lime or limestone, try and bring it up to 6.5 if you can, right? Don't grow alfalfa because the pH is too bloody low. I mean, people say, oh, I want to grow alfalfa. I can grow alfalfa at 5.5, but I may as well grow grass because it does not nodulate or produce nitrogen. It will grow there, but not very well. In other words, it only becomes an aggressive crop when the pH is 6.5 to 7, and then you've got a nice, good aggressive crop. So, I mean, what you do is you check your soil pH. That gives you an idea of your crop yields, and as it starts to going lower, you look at these other problems now. And you look at things like saline soil, overly wet soil, and all these other factors. But fortunately, almost all the farming areas we have where there is an abundance, not abundance, but a surplus of wood ash is all all around the acidic areas because forests grow in acidic areas. And farming in acidic areas could well do with using it up in the Peace region. They would be foolish if they did not grab hold of every ton of wood ash they could, because the amount of nutrients in that wood ash exceeds the cost of applying it.
Yeah, and it's almost like the big fella knew what he was doing, hey, when he made the forest and the soil.
Uh-huh. Well, the forests do pick up nutrients from way down, eh? And in other words, the trees have to grow and they pick it up and over time, and they recycle it. But what's the point in cutting up, when a forest burns, does anyone go out and check the soil pH? No. I mean, but it recycles it, and it's not that much an acre. But when you got these piles of wood ash sitting down because you take all the green stuff off the trees and the bark, and you say, oh, we'll take it to the landfill, Fred. Well, put it on a cropland. What's wrong with it on the cropland? It came from land. It came from normal growing areas, and I mean, when people start looking for problems, you see, a lot of federal people and government people don't look for solutions; they look for problems. And then they look
So
for
if
problems.
we're getting into action mode here, and trying to use some of this stuff for the greater good, how large should a trial strip be, Ieuan?
Well, a trial strip should be a minimum. I'd say any field of 10 acres, in a quarter section. If possible, do half of it or a third of it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, you really want to see and stand back. And you really want to sort of you go down that row and take grain samples and yield samples. We did this repeatedly with zinc and copper, eh? And people now, for example, wood ash contains some zinc anyway, but not a great deal. But we're using more and more corn now, and corn is a big user of zinc anyway. But that's besides. What I would like to add to this is this. People drive around towns these days and they see these wonderful flowers and stuff in baskets and boxes, right? I'm not deviating from that. How the hell do they grow those wonderful things? Because the horticulturists are taught about complete nutrient levels. They're taught about NPK and S and all the micronutrients. You buy an expensive jar of, let's say, Miracle Grow or whatever the label is, and it's fertilizer. You look at it on the back and it's got NPK and S on it, and then it's got all the micronutrients, molybdenum, boron, copper, zinc, manganese. It's all on the back. They've learned
Yeah.
that they put the micros with the bloody stuff. You get farmers here who go, oh, we would never use micronutrients. I don't know. We have no need for them. For Christ's sake, guys, smell the
Yeah, and
coffee.
I'm gonna start putting some wood ash in a jar and selling it at Canadian Tire based on this talk. But back to
You
wood
should.
ash. Back to wood ash. Back to wood ash. What would you measure year over year in these trials?
Well, what I would measure, if I put a wood ash in the field and the pH is low, I know, like I say, I've seen the long-lasting differences when I've driven up many, many times to the piece, where these, I told you the wood piles burnt, you know what I mean? And either piles in the middle of a field or drift piles,
Mhm.
I've seen that. And you can see that on the field because when a farmer puts on wood ash, if he does it, he's putting it over the whole field, so you can't see any difference, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
when you drive by and you see sort of what was a huge pile of cleared land, and you see this green strip down the field, you know what I mean? And the cattle on it feeding on the damn thing, you say, hey, look at the nutrients that was concentrated in those trees and branches
Yeah.
that's now on the land, because he cleared it off from a couple of areas. But I would do a half field. I would like to see the feds or the provincial government do some half fields for God's sake. People always want to do a whole field. You're not going to see the difference. You always have a hard time getting someone to put, say, a micronutrient or a macronutrient on part of a field.
But yeah,
I
and
mean,
we're not going to get more research in the
oh
universe
no, but
in the
but if you're a
feds right
farmer,
now.
if you're
Yeah.
a farmer, do half a field,
Well,
do
if you're
8
set
acres.
up, if you're already set up, it makes sense, and you're already getting, and it comes in big quantities, I'm sure. What sort of difference would you see if we only did 1 ton versus 2 tons, or in some cases here we had Doug say he's doing 8?
Well, Doug is doing the right thing because he's taking alfalfa off, and it's a heavy user, now a very heavy user.
Yeah.
Now, I know that's the biggest user of nutrients, and he's right. But if you were a farmer though, I would say, and if any doubt, do a half field because I see them buying things or talking about products, and they never do it. They'd have to do the whole bloody field. Well, find a way, divide the field so that you add the product to half the field or a third of the field. Please do that. I've almost had to plead with farmers, don't do the whole field. When I was demonstrating, say, the use of, say, copper in a wet year, I'd often walk in the field with a bucket of bluestone and make a bloody big C, you know what I mean? Throwing it on the ground and then calling the farmer 2 weeks later, do you see any difference? Yeah, there's a bloody big C out there in the barley or a big C out there in the wheat. Like, did you see it? Yeah, it works. I've been telling you for Christ's sake. So many orders, how many ton of bloody bluestone to fly on or put on.
Are we getting consistent wood ash between mills?
It would be much the same. There wouldn't be that much difference in a way. I mean, I could hardly see. There would be, might say maybe a lower calcium in some of them. Maybe it's only 30% calcium, and the other one's 40% or 45, depending how fiercely they burnt it or whatever. But when you burn wood ash, you liberate all the sulfur. You drive it off, and you drive all the nitrogen off. So any nitrogen or sulfur left in those trees or branches is gonzo. The nitrogen goes into elemental nitrogen, and the sulfur becomes some sort of form of sulfur dioxide or sulfur. It releases to the air. So the sulfur is gone, the nitrogen is gone. But the other elements, phosphate and potash, are not, well, they stay there. If it's a lot of smoke, you will lose some potash and some phosphate with heavy smoke, but they avoid heavy smoke. They have night bright burning furnaces, and these things do not pollute the bloody air. And therefore, you've got the potash is all, and the phosphate is in the ash. Now, when you get a forest fire with lots of smoke, you're actually spreading phosphate and potash over the bloody area as well. It's redistributing a bit. I don't say it's going to make any difference to yields. Don't get me on that. I couldn't say that. I'm not one of those people that says, "Oh, it makes a big difference." No, no, no. Unless I get the facts, because see, crop production is totally factual. And then when I look at some of the things that farmers buy or do or recommend, it's coffee shop rubbish. It's
Are
it's
you a
uh,
fan
opinion.
of? Are you a fan of? Does pyrolysis fit into here anywhere?
What do you mean by pyrolysis
I
exactly?
mean burning without oxygen.
Oh, so you get charcoal wood, you mean?
Well, I mean, hey, I guess I was just thinking of a very specific circumstance where there was highly available zinc that came out of, believe it or not, the oil field, Fort Mac. They were recycling those massive tires that come off the loaders, and they were burning it in a very specific process of pyrolysis. And the zinc that was in that stuff, like that big piles of powder, was incredible. It was highly Western agronomy professionals measured the rate of release, and it was visceral. So I just wondered. Anyways, we're getting close to the top of the hour here, and you know what, Ieuan,
Well,
that's incredible information. Doug McFarlane's saying we usually get about 20% carbon in the ash, depends on the efficiency of burning. So
yes, it would depend on how hot it went or how well it was done.
I'm going to put up the CEU credits, which I appreciate everybody being patient, waiting a little bit for. We are going to be a little bit more aggressive this time in getting organized for our new topic. And I think this morning we were already, can everybody see that? Scan that with your phone, get your CEU credits for all the agronomists. I'll take it largely as agronomists on the call today. Had a really nice little crowd. If you guys have any questions or comments about this particular topic.
I'll try to. If you have any questions, try and ask me, because I can't always answer them. But having spent 60 years,
you did great today.
having spent 60 years in agriculture, I went to University of Wales, University of Florida, taught at the University of Guelph, and spent 50 years in Alberta. I'm going from prairie to prairie, going from Manitoba, well, actually from Quebec all the way to BC. So I think I know some things. I don't know all things.
Well, and Ieuan, we are extremely honored to have your wisdom in this classroom. Doug is saying we also get very high zinc when they burn pellets also.
I have fun doing it. I'm not sure where the zinc comes from, because, I mean, like I say, one of my, let's say, detractors would say, we're putting copper on the field is like, it's a waste of money. It's like throwing pennies on the wheat. And I pointed out to him that pennies were 97% zinc.
I love the voices that you use for other people. It's very entertaining when you get
Well, we did a lot of that in Wales. You imitate other people. I can imitate a lot of people, actually.
Do you have anybody like famous people impressions?
Oh, well, you try. No, English, for example, you could be very English. One could decide on that, or you could be South African. You know what I mean? Or Jamaica. You're from Jamaica. We're on the island there, boys, and we have to.
Can you do like Arnold Schwarzenegger or something interesting?
No, I'd have to listen to it for a while. Rob is better than me at that.
Yeah.
Well,
I was golfing with Rob last week. You know what? It's funny you say that, because I was golfing with Rob's sake. Jill will laugh at this. She's chuckling right now at this whole conversation. But I went golfing with Rob's sake last week in Arizona, and the amount of voices he had, like at one point it was nothing but like weird baby voices, chipmunk voices, singing, making up songs about me and my terrible golf game. It was great. So, but
don't forget Steve Stubble-Jumsky was my best friend. Rob Syke came in second.
I don't know if that says a lot about you or Rob, if that was your best friend, but anyways, you know what? It's been a really great talk about wood ash. I think it's especially, coming from the biosoil world, and I know Doug, I think, had tried out some elemental sulfur, and there's the elemental sulfur and lime and the wood ash and all these things. But what a wonderful opportunity for folks to use it, and it's likely being underutilized, as you say, and we appreciate you educating us about it. If anybody doesn't have any extra questions, I would say, Ieuan, the next discussion that we want to get into is about diseases. Yeah. Did you want to say a few words on that?
Well, yeah. Well, let's get the fact what disease is. We need to know the facts, not the fluff. You're not to know this new product coming along, or might do this or might do that. I may touch on herbicides, but not heavy on them. Possibly on insecticides, but I'd be mainly on fungicides. And in terms of looking at canola, looking as to how it moves around, let's say the diseases of canola, and it's getting pretty serious. And prevention systems, avoidance systems, you have to do that. And I will try and do my best. And as I can end up with the saying, "You bet your ash I do."
Oh my God! I think that's a great place to leave it, on a dad joke that's worse than My kids would be rolling their eyes right now. Dad. Whew.
Well, one time I sent a card to a girlfriend of mine, and I put on it. It was a Valentine card, and inside it said, "You bet your ass I do," and it's a picture of a donkey.
How did that go over?
Badly, very badly.
No, I can imagine. All right, everybody. Well, I guess we've reached the limits of our wisdom for a Monday morning, if you haven't noticed. But it was fun. It was wonderful. Great job, Ieuan, today. You really were on point.
Well, if you, like I say, as you were down in Arizona, muchas gracias.
Okay. I didn't know there was speaking Mexican, but yeah. All right. Well, everybody, have a great Monday. Have a great week. Thanks for joining us in the Growing the Future Mastermind. We'll put the recording in the classroom. We'll put the transcripts in the classroom and the takeaways. And we've got some. I'm working on some really great experts coming down the pipe on all kinds of stuff. So stay tuned. And thank you so much for your patronage and your continued support of being here. And I hope that you all got great value out of this. And let us know if there's a topic that you want Ieuan to cover.
Yeah. And any questions, send them my way, and I'll try and answer them.
And yeah, when you're out and about this week, make sure to cover your ash. Thanks, everybody. Take care.